So let's look at why people are dying and how should the body respond to this and how is it actually responding. So the first point is, you're going to breathe this virus in, and it's going to go through the trachea here and bronchioles. And so these parts here all have mucus that could trap the virus. At the same time, I believe it can embed in some of these areas. But what we're most worried about is that the virus gets breathed in and makes it to the alveoli, which happens. Okay, so what happens next? So the virus will come in here, it will bind with the receptor in there, and it will take over this cell and cause it to make viruses. Okay. Now, some of these cells here, obviously just for letting oxygen go through into the blood. And so you can see they're quite thin cells. Some of these cells make a liquid called surfactant. So surfactant levels are going to be lower. What should the body's response be to this when there's a virus in there? So your typical response would be this, what we call the macrophage. And the macrophage there, which I've tried to show, will try and it will receive some kind of signal from this cell that all is not well, such as displaying a protein spike or something, or releasing some kind of chemical message or cytokine. And so this white blood cell will have to surround the whole cell and kill the human body cell, and it will do that. Okay, and so once it's surrounded the human body cell there, it's going to present, well, first of all, it's going to digest the whole cell. That's quite a mammoth feat. And it's going to present viral proteins there on its surface. Okay. And so these antigen protein complexes on its surface are going to start an immune response. And so the immune response will be that memory T cells will bind to this, helper T cells and B plasma cells will be triggered by this protein that's displayed on the outside. Okay, and so you'll get your standard immune response will involve B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. There's a hell of a lot of stuff to learn here, isn't there? But let's just talk you through it super quickly. Okay, so you've got phagocytosis. So the main one, we lump at A level, we're lumping all these together. So we can just think of the macrophage doing what I've just explained that it does, which engulfs bacteria or cells or viruses. Okay, and then digests them in lysosomes with lysozymes. This one, the inflammation cells here, very important. If you've got an asthma attack, you're going to have loads of those. But we're not really going to study that on this course. So instead, we've got helper T cells. Now they're going to release something called cytokines, which stimulate plasma B cells, memory B cells, cytotoxic T cells, and memory T cells. Now the cytotoxic T cells here, folks, are pretty useful when dealing with viruses because these, as the name suggests, release toxic chemicals that are going to destroy the identified cells, which remember are human cells, and they're going to start destroying human cells there, but they have to because the human cell has been taken over by a virus. So they're quite useful in breaking up infected human cells. Okay. The plasma B cells are going to produce antibodies that's going to encourage the macrophages, etc., to start digesting human cells. Okay, and then obviously the memory cells there are for protection against a second infection, folks. And so let's follow Arthur. We've got a virus here still with spikes on, presenting to the antigen with a T cell or a B cell. You've got signaling between both with cytokines, and then you've got mass cloning of all of these plasma cells, B cells, memory cells, helper cells, cytotoxic T cells. And as I said, the cytotoxic T cells are super important. And so what should happen then is, this cell gets infected, macrophage comes along, sets a signal off, and the cytotoxic T cells come along and deal with it, and that's the end of the virus. So that's what should happen, folks. What is actually happening? There's all kinds of mysteries going on here that our understanding of this will probably change. So the ACE2 receptor limits the magnitude of inflammation, and so with that knocked out by those particular cells with ACE2 receptors knocked out, means we are seeing a lot of what is killing people is a too high inflammation, a too high immune response. Okay, another role of ACE2 is lowering blood pressure. Okay, so what is this too high immune response? So one of the immune responses is these capillaries here are going to become leaky, and that's normally allows white blood cells to get to the area, but it also involves fluid leaking from the capillary into the lung. Okay, and so those of you that are more astute will realize, well, on your course, well, we need a short diffusion pathway here for oxygen to get in. And so the first kind of problem when things get serious is a lot of leakage or edema there around the alveoli and in the alveoli. And so what's that going to do? That's going to make it difficult to get oxygen. Okay. Coupled, to make that worse, you can actually have too many white blood cells sent to the area. They can actually damage these capillary walls, and also you're going to have a lot of white blood cells in the alveoli, a lot of debris from the work that the cytotoxic T cells have done. You've got all kinds of stuff in there, not just fluid. You've got proteins flying around. Okay, and so you should see the problem. How's the oxygen supposed to get through? Okay, you're filling up there. So one of the responses there is to cough and get some of these proteins out, get some of this fluid out with a cough. Okay, that's one way of dealing with it. Obviously, as this progresses, it's going to be a numbers game, isn't it? How many alveoli are affected? If it's just a few, maybe you can cough it out. If it's a lot of alveoli, you're going to be low in oxygen. What are we going to do with you? We're going to put you on oxygen, folks, as Boris Johnson was. We're going to put you on oxygen. This is actually called pneumonia. That is pneumonia. Fluid on the lung, fluid in the alveoli is pneumonia. So it's pneumonia that's causing the problem. So the other one is, as I say, normally surfactant is produced by these cells, and that actually acts as a bit of a shock absorber to stop them collapsing, and without it you can actually have some of these cells collapse altogether. We don't really need to go into too much detail about that. That's a beyond A level sort of thing. And also there's this thing called a cytokine storm, where what seems to happen there is I talked about the phagocyte or macrophage, triggering off white blood cell division. In some people it triggers off white blood cells that aren't even useful. It can end up triggering the wrong white blood cells. And that's what I said about if you've got huge number, I mean, you know this, when you break a bone, everything swells up. So imagine the same thing's happening in your lung. It's all swelling up because the body's identified something gone wrong. And so huge quantities of white blood cells in a cytokine storm end up here, and they're just in the way of breathing. And if you have a lack of oxygen, how are you going to respond? Your heart rate is going to go right up through the roof, folks. Why is that a problem? Well, if you're someone with a weak heart, folks, and problems with high blood pressure, you really don't want a lack of oxygen in your blood and a massively increased heart rate. Okay, so you are going to be, as we could say, someone with pre-existing conditions is going to be facing a problem. But what's strange is, again, scientists think with the Spanish flu, you would say a cytokine storm is a very vigorous, immune response. Your immediate thought about that, well, that'll be the young people get that then, because their immune systems work faster than older people. So it's a bit of a mystery that it seems to be older people having these cytokine storms. And that is not obvious, and that is not a given. And people think in the Spanish flu, people were dying a lot between the ages of 20 and 30 years old, and they were having cytokine storms. With this coronavirus, they are not. They're still dying, but it's a much lower death rate. And so the people having cytokine storms are much older in this one, and so we don't know why. We don't know why that is happening. We do know that old people tend to have less T cells altogether in their bloodstream, and so maybe, if you don't respond quickly enough, you get more and more virus in your alveoli, and by the time you get enough white blood cells there, it's too many of your alveoli are affected. I do not know, and we do not know exactly what's going on. But what's killing you is inflammation, folks. It's not. But this happens quite regularly with pneumonia, and also all the targets for a new drug would be stuff that reduces inflammation in general.